Number 3, the yeast of the Pharisees. Sit at the table and open your book to station number 3. I hope you sense the Lord making your heart lighter as you focus on things you are grateful for. As Pastor Mark began our sermon series in Galatians, he pointed out the danger of the yeast of the Pharisees. Paul simply says, a little yeast works through the whole batch of dough. Well, yeah, that's its job. Its tiny particles work their way through the dough, spreading out into every area of the batch. Yeast doesn't just stay there, dormant. No, it begins to have the desired effect. In bread, it causes the dough to rise and to take a light, airy shape. It also adds taste and texture to the bread, making it more desirable to eat. But the yeast of the Pharisees was sinful. Their teachings spread out to the whole village, the town, and the region. This was great when what they were teaching was in line with God's truth, but it became toxic when it stepped outside of the bounds of truth and into the bounds of what we call false teaching. Paul was probably referring to the same words of Jesus when, in Matthew 16, he told us to be on guard against the yeast of the Pharisees. False teaching that blatantly opposes the truth of God is pretty easy to discern. We can easily identify that and protect ourselves from it. Much of the Pharisee false teaching wasn't as easy to identify. It looked like it was good and godly. It appeared to lead to a life growing closer to God. But Jesus said the Pharisees were whitewashed tombs, appearing to be filled with life, but they were really dead inside. And if they were dead inside, then there was no life in their teaching either. In front of you on the table is a list of some of the false teachings active in our culture today. Ask the Lord to identify if any of their yeast has been spread into your heart. Be sensitive to his leading. Listen to him. If you hear him bringing something up, ponder it, ask for clarity, and then act on it. Confess your sin to him and ask for forgiveness. If you choose not to act on it, or if you disagree with God on his definition of sin, or his calling you to something deeper, you won't be able to progress in your relationship with him until you address what he's bringing to your mind. Now pick up the model of the house that you see in front of you. In your mind's eye, let it represent your life. Take some of the yeast from the bowl on the table between your thumb and your forefinger and sprinkle it over the areas of the house. See how the particles stick here and there? It represents false teaching that has infiltrated your life. Now take the pair of tweezers and try to pick off the yeast one particle at a time. This would be easy to do if the particles were grouping together, forming a large false teaching that had an impact on your life. But as tiny particles of yeast, they're very hard to remove. When a false teaching grows in your heart and starts to take over in our life, it's easy for others to identify it. But the small aspects of false teaching that we begin to believe are much harder to identify. And this is when it's easier to remove. In the Old Testament, God's people were commanded to remove all the yeast from their homes before the Sabbath. This tangible exercise reminded them to keep their minds focused on the truth of God's holy written word. They would remove the jars that contained yeast, the mixing bowls and baking pans they used to bake with yeast, and any other utensils or serving plates that were associated with something that was made with yeast. And then they would go through their house and sweep it to make sure there was no remaining yeast anywhere. And then they would go through their house a second time with great care and concern that they were able to get every last little piece of yeast out of their house. The tweezers really weren't very helpful, were they? How much yeast is still in your house? If you don't see any left on your house, then why don't you take some more and sprinkle it on there? Let them represent those you didn't catch the first time around. Now pick up the brush and the dustpan and do your best to remove every single piece of yeast from your house. And as you do this, prayerfully ask the Lord to remove every single piece of yeast that is leading you to sin in your life. Be sure to write down anything that you're hearing from Him.
Now it's time for you to move on to the next prayer station. Make your way to